Deltarune is a game which is kept alive by its fanbase in the long waits between chapters. Among all the art, animations, fanfiction, fan games, and some more passionate tributes to the game, one of the biggest fan creations which keep the hype alive are theories. In the years between chapters, theories about what will happen next in the game's story appear almost daily, some being just small headcanons, and others being extremely complex and evidence-based predictions of what Tricky Tony has up his sleeve. Occasionally, a fan theory will correctly predict the next chapter's contents, such as Noelle's mother being named Carol, Tenna being a TV-headed character, and even the location of Chapter 4's Dark World. Now, a lot of these theories do end up being untrue, but regardless of this, the reach of some of these theories is extremely impressive. Terms like Woody theory and chess theory are nearly synonymous with the game at this point, even being directly referenced in-game, and you can learn a lot about a Deltarune fan based on what theories they subscribe to. And while a lot of these more popular theories end up being disproven, it's nice to have a pretty solid prediction to hang on to during the years between releases. Every one of these periods have a pretty big theory that the community seems to agree on. After Chapter 1, a lot of people agreed Ralsei was evil and Chris was Kara. Chapter 2 brought around chess theory and Chris Knight theory. And now that Chapters 3 and 4 are out, most people agree that Death's Holiday is the knight and Susie might not be one of the heroes of prophecy. However, out of the woodwork of the post-Chapter 3 and 4 era has emerged a theory which has turned the community against each other. A theory so deep-rooted in headcanons that the fact that there's a real consistent evidence for it has caught the fandom off guard. Something that has brought out the worst in the community. Okay, I'm trying to be verbose for dramatic effect, but let's just get to the point. Is Ralsei a girl? Before we get into why this theory has gotten the fandom so worked up, let's take a moment to review all of the evidence there is for Ralsei to be canon. For the sake of clarity, I will be referring to Ralsei with he/him pronouns throughout this video, as while there is evidence for the contrary, Ralsei is only outwardly called a boy throughout Deltarune and from Toby. I'm not denying the possibility that this theory is true, but there are some other reasons why I'll be referring to Ralsei this way that I'll return to later in the video. When Deltarune initially released in 2018, many fans were taken by surprise by the reveal of hatless Ralsei and the ending of Chapter 1. This caused some confusion in fans, mistakenly thinking Ralsei was a girl, but any level of reading comprehension would show that this isn't the case, although you can't assume that's something Deltarune fans have. By the time Chapter 2 came around, the vast majority of this confusion had been cleared up, and most people were too busy thinking Ralsei was going to be secretly evil to question his gender.
Doesn't look good for me.
By this point, most people only headcanoned Ralsei as trans, not seriously expecting Toby to have him transition mid-game. But this will all change on the release of Chapters 3 and 4, as a seemingly overwhelming amount of evidence for Ralsei made itself apparent. Let's go back to Chapter 1 and work our way through, shall we? When we first meet Ralsei, he's wearing a cloak which prevents us from seeing what he looks like. Following this, we get Ralsei's retelling of the prophecy, which features fairly damning silhouettes of both Chris and Susie. However, when it comes to him, we just see him in his cloak. Jumping ahead a bit to Chapter 4, when you make it to the prophecy panel featuring Ralsei, the very same cloaked outline appears. So according to the prophecy, this is how Ralsei is supposed to be. But after some mild peer pressure from Susie, he takes it off, showing us his hatted form, which is really the first point where Susie changes the narrative of the prophecy. He clearly doesn't want to remove the cloak, but once it's off, he never seems to want to put it back on. At this point, Ralsei is wearing something that closely resembles a cloak or shawl, and his arms are nowhere to be seen. Throughout the chapter, we get little hints at Ralsei's femininity, which will be revealed by chapter's end. When given the white ribbon you can find early on in the Field of Hopes and Dreams, Ralsei is shocked that Chris wants him to have it and asks if he looks pretty. As well as this, Ralsei's weapon is called a dainty scarf, a word, according to Google, meaning small and pretty. There's that word again. Ralsei seems pretty dedicated to using the word, well, pretty, and feeling emotional whenever he feels that way, as seen with the white ribbon showing him blushing. The end of the chapter has the most interesting point of evidence so far though, as Ralsei is revealed to have still been hiding his true appearance. With more Susie peer pressure, he takes off his hat to show his true self, pink horns, eyelashes, and all. Following this, Ralsei's arms are always showing, making his outfit look much more akin to a dress. The prophecy seems to be a little lenient with Ralsei's appearance, but this is a step too far. Anywhere you look in the game featuring Ralsei, from the fireworks in Cyber City, his appearance in The Legend of Tenna, and even his icon during battles only feature him with his hat on. We can see this in the final moments of Chapter 1 that he wants to show his friends his true self, but it's not until Susie convinces him that he finally does. Ralsei is driven to follow the prophecy to a T, being shocked when Susie joins Lancer's team and instructing Chris how to fight in the Dark World. So of course that extends to what his role in the prophecy is supposed to be. He's the Prince of the Dark, and he's not supposed to be anything more than that. He's just the third hero, alone in Deepest Dark. Everything Susie does throughout the game is taking Ralsei out of that role. First of all, no longer having him be alone. As Ralsei will continue to say throughout the game, he's not supposed to have feelings and opinions on things, and that against all odds, he's become good friends with Chris and Susie. This also extends to his appearance, slowly breaking down his reliance on the prophecy with Susie's help and eventually revealing his true self. This theory continues to grow in the second chapter, as Ralsei's removal of his hat doesn't end up being temporary. He's happy to be his true self around Chris and Susie, and he has no intention of going back to what the prophecy wants him to be. He's kept his hat on the royal coat rack, with it saying that he'll hold on to it until Ralsei needs it again. We'll check up on this guy later. In addition to Ralsei keeping his hat off, he also seems to have more emotion and individuality in a more metatextual way. In Chapter 1, Ralsei only has 13 unique talking sprites, all of them being fairly basic emotions. This pales in comparison to Chapter 2's whopping 39 unique talking sprites. While this could be because a full face has more options to show different emotions, it's also interesting how Susie, a character whose talking sprites were also shrouded in the majority of Chapter 1, has a similar amount to Ralsei. Both characters who are hiding who they truly are in an effort to conform, Susie to being the bully and Ralsei to follow the prophecy, have less emotion. By Chapter 2 though, both are far more expressive and emotional. This extends into Chapters 3 and 4, where Ralsei now has a total of 55 individual talking sprites, the most of any character in the game. Back to the story proper. Another big moment for Ralsei fans takes place in the acid tunnel in Queen's Mansion. At this point, Ralsei has some alone time with Chris, and this was also some major fuel for Ralsei fans, but that's not the reason we're talking about this. At one point, Ralsei starts talking about how much he's learned about friendship and that everyone has different emotions and feelings. He talks about Susie being brash at times, but generally kind, and appreciates Chris being Chris. If you respond by saying that you like that Ralsei is Ralsei, he'll panic, saying that he's never had to think about who he is as a person before, and wonders what being Ralsei like even means. His whole identity has been shaped by the prophecy, so when he's finally free to do what he wants to do and be who he wants to be, he isn't sure where to start. He clearly isn't the person the prophecy wants him to be, seeing as he's had to wear multiple disguises to conform to it. Physically, he's escaped from the prophecy's grasp, but is yet to internalize his true self and fully understand what it means to be Ralsei. This is a good way of showing Ralsei's past reliance to the prophecy, but it's also a little transcoded. Before we leave Chapter 2 though, there's still one more piece of fairly damning evidence we have yet to cover. This dress. In the Cyber City, there's an Addison selling this blue dress on the mannequin. This isn't the first time we've seen this blue dress. In fact, we've seen it twice before in Undertale. First, we can see it on Mettaton during the musical sequence in Hotland. Mettaton is, basically, a canon transmasked character. When reading his diary, we can see him talking about his EX body as a form where I can finally feel like myself. So there's one trans character with connections to this dress. Now where else can we find it? After said musical number, you can backtrack and find a lion awkwardly leaning up against a wall wearing masculine clothing. Mettaton looked really cool in that dress. Sort of makes me feel like I could wear one too. If you come back to this area after getting the true pacifist ending, you'll see the lion once again wearing the exact dress she was referring to earlier. Mettaton, he recognized my voice from when I called in and he gave me his dress. So, she's literally experiencing gender euphoria in front of our eyes. And this isn't where the story of this lion comes to an end. In the hometown diner in Deltarune, you can find a very familiar looking waitress. Boom, trans woman right there. So now, the fact that the only times this dress has appeared is for the sake of a gender non-conforming trans-masked character and being the trans from Awakening for another makes Ralsei's response to Chris trying to put the mannequin on him very interesting. The dress is cute. Do I even need to explain how much of a smoking gun this is? And if you look in the stats, if Ralsei were to wear it, he would pick up his cuteness level. Do you understand why this theory is so reasonable now? Chapter 3 doesn't contain any crazy bombshells like the first two chapters, but it's not completely absent of additional evidence. Mainly, we can see some light hints in the different costumes he wears throughout the chapter. His chef outfit in the cooking minigame resembles a dress similar to his normal appearance, and this wasn't by accident. The fun gang seems to be able to choose what they want to wear during these minigames. Chris wearing a waiter's outfit and Susie having an apron that says, "Kiss the my ass," so this design wasn't just coincidence. Besides this, Ralsei curtsies when introduced by Tenna, a typically female way of greeting people. This is not to say it's exclusive to them. In fact, let me be very clear in saying that none of these things are exclusive to those who identify as female. We'll discuss this more later on, but right now we're just taking a look at all of Ralsei's more feminine traits to try and create a theory. A final thing from Chapter 3, and this is mostly a joke, but you can get the blue ribbon. The blue ribbon is one of 3 ribbon armor pieces you can get throughout the game. And if you get Malleus to join your castle town at the end of Chapter 1, you can combine the prior 2 ribbons to make an upgraded twin ribbon. Now, Ralsei can equip both the twin ribbon and the blue ribbon at the same time. And what colors of ribbons do you need to make the twin ribbon? Pink and white, baby! Ralsei's wearing the trans flag! Okay, but let's take a serious look at these ribbons. If you try to equip any ribbons to Susie, she'll outright refuse to put them on. This is a common thread with a lot of more traditionally feminine armor pieces, such as the mannequin, the twin ribbon, and the princess ribbon. Ralsei, however, will wear them easily. With both the white and pink ribbon, he'll ask if he looks cute. He'll also call the princess ribbon cute, although the gloves don't fit. Yet. Alright, now for a more narrative-focused piece of evidence. Going back to Ralsei's struggles with identity, he explains to Susie that Darkners aren't real people, and that they shouldn't be treated as such. He says that he's being selfish for having feelings and desires of his own, and says that he knows deep down he's not really Susie's friend. But Susie is absolutely against this and tells Ralsei that he's as real as she is. Doesn't seem to believe this though, as in the end of the chapter he tells Tenna the same thing. They shouldn't care what happens to them since they'll all become obsolete, their only purpose having been to make the Lightners happy. Susie once again interjects this and talks about the time Toriel found her all alone, and how she told her that she'd make friends someday. And this is where she says a very interesting line. Even though I thought I was broken, I just needed to find the right people, you know? She needed to find the right people to be who she wanted to be. Sound familiar? Now, let's move on to the chapter that really reignited this theory. This chapter really destroyed anyone who still clung on to the evil Ralsei theory. Chapter 4 really digs into Ralsei's belief that the prophecy can't be changed and that everything is on a set path. Throughout the chapter, it's revealed that Ralsei knows the prophecy verbatim, and that the version of the prophecy that he shared with Chris and Susie in the first chapter was abridged. Every little detail of the Fun Gang's journey, from the notes Chris will play on the piano to each individual word Lancer will say, is documented, and Ralsei knows it all. In the second sanctuary, Susie calmly asks Ralsei why he won't tell them how to get to the end, or more specifically, what will happen when they get there. Ralsei reveals that the knowledge hurts and that he feels like he should be the only one to carry the burden of the prophecy. Also, small side note, in the second sanctuary, everyone's color palettes are slightly different. Ralsei's is particularly interesting because it looks a little familiar. Wait a second. At the end of the third sanctuary, Susie sees the final prophecy, and Ralsei is devastated, but she insists that they won't let it happen, and that the prophecy doesn't have the final say. Interestingly, Susie says, "I wouldn't let it happen, Chris wouldn't let it happen, and obviously you wouldn't let it happen." With this line, my guess is to say both worlds, the dark fountain connecting the light world to Castletown, will have to be sealed, meaning that Ralsei wouldn't exist anymore. This would explain Ralsei's continued belief that Darkners are only alive to help the Lightners, and that they shouldn't have emotions of their own, seeing as he himself will only truly be alive for a week. Why would someone who lives for such a short time, and is only alive to fulfill a prophecy, need to find out who they truly are? It makes everything Ralsei said in the past make sense, and explains why he's so hesitant to what he calls selfish desires, such as having friends. He's trying to push down the feelings he has, since it will only mean he'll have more to lose. But because of Susie, he's been able to slowly break down that mindset, first with the cloak, then with his hat, and now with his belief that their fates are decided. I want to believe again. I want to believe it can change, that there isn't just one ending. Susie's hope, her naive hope, it's infectious. Isn't it, Chris? So until we see fate with our own eyes, let's believe too. He's decided that his life is worth living, and he's going to try and avoid whatever fate the prophecy has in store for him. And maybe, with that hope, he can become who he truly is, whatever that may be. Now, we have one more thing to cover in Chapter 4, and it's a big one. When visiting Castletown at the start of the chapter, you can go check out the area where Ralsei's made rooms for people. Queen and Tenna both now have a room, and brief side note, if you go into Tenna's room, you can find the royal coat hanger, which says it's lost Ralsei's had forever. What a shame. It's almost like this is subtextually saying Ralsei's comfortable without hiding who he is and doesn't want to return to how he was. But if you continue down the hall, you can also find a dimly lit door which leads into Ralsei's room. Susie says the last one isn't the fresh egg, and also Ralsei has been called an egg a few times. How odd. And rushes in. Going inside, you find out that Ralsei's room is completely empty. Ralsei continues on the whole Darkners aren't people, so he doesn't deserve belongings thing, and Susie once again says that it won't do. Once Susie leaves though, Ralsei confronts Chris about how he's changed throughout the 4 chapters. I'm starting to feel like I'm developing my own opinions. My own likes, my own dislikes, my own desires, my own fears. Please, tell me, should a Darkner be feeling like this? He's finally accepting that he has a personality and feelings of his own, and the main crux of this theory is that in the next few chapters, this will climax in Ralsei deciding that he's not a Prince of the Dark at all. Most interestingly, a certain song plays in this scene which really exemplifies this. Lost Girl. A song called Lost Girl, which has only played before when 2 other girls who've lost their way in some manner are monologuing. Now, of course, this might just be the name of the song, not having anything to do with the message, such as April 2012 and Chapter 1, not having anything to do with the party room, but hot diggity shit, this is some pretty damn good evidence for Ralsei if I've ever seen it. Now, we've gone through all the evidence. It seems like a fairly well-based theory. I wonder what the community has to say about it. There are a lot, and I mean a lot of people against this theory for a variety of reasons. Let's get to the most obvious one. Transphobia! People don't want Wokey Fox putting a trans character in big popular indie game to push the woke agenda. But before we get into this, can we talk about how ridiculous it is for this to be the big issue for transphobes? Like mentioned before, there are practically 2 canon trans characters, hell 3 actually, including Mad Mew Mew. And don't get me started about the non-binary and agender rep in the series, with Monster Kid, Chris, and even Shum using they-them pronouns. Going back to Undertale, Nabstabluke also uses they-them, and let's not forget the roaring fucking knight using it-they. So why in the world would people care if one more character in Deltarune is trans? It's like finding a fork in the utensil drawer. Don't come after the woke indie game for potentially having another trans character. At that point, just hate the entire game. You'd think that's the case, but there are plenty of people who are fans of the game but simply try to cover their ears and la their way through the more blatant representation. While there's obviously the fans, and fans is a strong word, so consumers of Deltarune who insist that Chris's gender is up for interpretation, and I swear to God if I hear that one more time I'm gonna lose my shit. There's also some people who still think Noelle and Susie are just friends. What the hell? How blind can you be? Okay, ran over. Sorry about that. On a more serious note, another side of people against this theory say that if it became canon, it would be erasure of gender non-conforming male and femboy representation. This is a more understandable argument, as there is a lack of this type of rep in modern media, but also because of what it would mean for stereotyping. Ralsei is a traditionally feminine character, someone who does curtsies, hosts tea parties, wears eyeliner and all that. So if Ralsei were to transition by the end of Deltarune, this would push the narrative that any GNC men who have traits like this are simply closeted trans women. While this is probably not Toby's intention, it would still leave a bad taste in some of the fandom's mouths. Enforcing gender roles like this isn't typical for Toby. However, there are some people who simply use the idea of GNC erasure as a disguise for transphobia, so there's an excuse for not wanting a character to have, or at some point, transition. Oh, that's not a trans woman, that's just a guy who likes wearing dresses, gender non-conforming rap. This is also extremely harmful, and while there are people in the community with genuine care for GNC representation, this subset of people makes the argument a sensitive topic. There's also an argument in the community for the idea of Ralsei itself being transphobic. For one, some people post about Ralsei using she/her pronouns, which say that misgendering is on an equal level to using pronouns other than they/them for Chris, and while Ralsei is only referred to with he/him pronouns in canon, most posts which do the opposite are referring to headcanons or simply promoting evidence for Ralsei. It's not nearly as bad as misgendering Chris, who is a canonical non-binary character, as Ralsei fans simply want to show their appreciation for their headcanon or talk about the in-game evidence. Some of these arguments I do agree with, such as it being harsh towards gender non-conforming men in terms of assuming that they're eggs, but I don't think that this is what the theory is trying to say about Ralsei. The story Toby has been telling so far about Ralsei is one of defying fate and being yourself in spite of everything. Ralsei hid most of his personality throughout Chapter 1, resorting to fairly basic conversations such as telling Chris how to play and simply reacting to what was happening around him. But as the game progressed and Susie convinced Ralsei to take off his hat and be more true to himself, we see more of who he is. Ralsei wants to host tea parties, he wants to wear eyeliner, he wants to be feminine, but this progression has been slow. We are gradually seeing more and more of who Ralsei is as he decides to stray further and further from the path the prophecy intended for him. So if the end result of this character arc is Ralsei transitioning, then not only will it make perfect sense in the context of the story, but will be completely justified. Coming out as trans is an extremely scary thing to do, both because of the global climate right now and because of the level of personal acceptance you have to share who you are to the world. Think about who Ralsei was in Chapter 3. He literally said that his life didn't matter and he was simply a tool to make Lightners happy. Does this look like the kind of person who has enough self-worth and mental fortitude to accept they're trans? Every chapter, Ralsei comes into his own a little bit more because of Susie's help and the experiences he's having. And each of these feminine traits is exemplified. In Chapter 1, Ralsei is nervous when asking if the white ribbon is pretty. But in Chapter 3, Ralsei acknowledges that both Susie and Chris think he's cute and he says that he's proud about that fact. So, do I think Ralsei being a trans woman is transphobic or erasure of GNC rep? No. While the headcanon could be interpreted as problematic in this regard, if it becomes canon, it will, in hindsight, be completely expected and narratively sound. Toby said in the past that his intention with Deltarune was to release Chapter 1 as a demo and wait until Chapters 2 through 7 were done to release the full game, but he quickly realized this would take some time. While time was definitely a concern, there was probably a good reason why he wanted to release Deltarune as a full package, and situations like this are likely one of them. If Ralsei ends up canon, it would have been far more clear if explained in 6 chapters at once than over the course of a decade. But Toby is doing his best, and we have to give him credit for the amazing chapters we've gotten so far. So to conclude, is Ralsei a girl? That's for him to figure out. Either way, he's a fantastically written character who's made me cry on multiple occasions and I absolutely adore. So no matter what he ends up being, I'm happy that Ralsei is Ralsei. And I can't wait to find out what being Ralsei-like truly means. Thank you so much for watching. I cannot extend enough thanks to this fantastic Tumblr post by Itty the Mouse for expertly documenting all the moments in-game that point towards Ralsei being true. It really helped me during the creation of this video. The link's in the description if you want to check it out. Thanks also to all the editors on the Deltarune wiki for keeping such a comprehensive guide towards every little character and interaction throughout the game. If you want to see more videos of mine, I don't have too many Deltarune things right now, but if you're a fan of Will Wood, Weezer, AJR, or Epic the Musical, I've got some pretty cool video essays talking about them. Hope you all have a great rest of your days.